Why were you and I so right about Alabama? If someone watched us in August, listened to what we forecasted for that team, which was centered around dominant offensive line play, and then they, went on a vacation for 3 months, and they came back just in time to watch the SEC title game, they probably watched that game and said, wow, Cubelic, or whoever that guy is with the podcast that Pate has on his show, those dudes were right. Look at them blowing Georgia off the ball. Now, I wouldn't tell this person that, but I think you and I and the rest of the audience know, took a little while to get up to speed. They finally got up to speed, so we were both trashed and praised for what we expected from that unit. How did they finally get there to that level of play, and why did it take so long?
Trashed and praised. Where was the praise? I have not familiar with.
It's mostly been via
praise.
Text, via family so far.
Okay. Oh, gotcha. Right. That would be fun. That if my family members cared enough about my college football takes that they texted me to tell me that I was right, I would appreciate that. And then to discount even further what you're saying, a lot of the folks after the fact, when I have gone out of my way to show visibly how good of a game that offensive line had, it's then been discounted by my average 2 yards a carry. How can you say they were dominant? Well, when I see defensive tackles going through the air backwards, I'm going to label that as dominant. That's usually at the top of my list. So when I see double teams knocking guys 2 gaps over, and the running back has plenty of space to be able to get through, and it's not his fault he doesn't make a second-level defender miss, I'm going to probably label that as dominant. But the reason why it took so long was the offense. And you had a new offensive coordinator with a new style of quarterback, not just a new quarterback, but a new style of quarterback that was going to take some figuring out. There was going to be a feeling out process. You didn't really know what you had on your hands once you were going to turn it all over to him. And I would imagine, haven't had this conversation with Nick Saban or Tommy Rees, Josh, but I would imagine, based on what happened in the A&M game last year and what I have been told was happening in some scrimmages, there was probably some nerves that were on red alert about some potential turnover issues and wanting to try to avoid those. So what do? You simplify. You make things easy. Well, the easier you make things on your guys, the easier you become to defend. And then there was point blank, there were things that were changed and altered throughout the course of the season. Tommy Rees began adding more motions. He began adding more movement pre and post snap, shifts, different personnel groupings. If you watch that Georgia game again, guess who was one of the players that had his best game in an Alabama uniform? Once again, that nobody's going to tell you about. I mean, number 45, Robbie Oots. Well, he hadn't been a mainstay for the first 4 or 5 games of the year because they probably didn't think they were going to need him to be a guy who operated in sometimes a quarterback run heavy offense. But when you can add a gap and you can add a blocker, I'd probably prefer for that blocker to be a good blocker as opposed to someone who has no interest in blocking. So therefore, their personnel groupings changed and morphed throughout the course of the season. We began to see some quarterback counter, which, by the way, for you play-by-play guys out there, every time the quarterback keeps the ball after a snap and runs, it's not quarterback power every single time. We saw quarterback counter. We saw quarterback power. We saw quarterback inside zone. So Tommy Rees figured out who his offense was. They found an identity. Look at weeks, what was it, like 3 through 5? You and I sat here and talked about it. They were a shot play offense. They were a handoff, Jalen Milroe throw the ball deep offense for about 3 or 4 weeks. That's what they were. And they knew they weren't going to be able to live that way forever, but they got away with it to a certain extent. They let the offensive line rip a little bit, began to feel it out, had the understanding. The freshmen got a little bit more comfortable. And then next thing you know, they began to look like a dominant group later in the season.
Now, also, you know that Pete Golding took immense criticism from Alabama folks when he was there. You sort of defended Pete Golding. You didn't say he's the greatest to ever coach the defensive side of the ball, but you said the criticism's probably a little overblown. Having said that, I don't think anyone can watch Alabama this year and deny that there's a different level of play up there. So how do you assess what's happened over on that side of the ball?
Well, for number one, I think they've calmed down a little bit. And Pete is just hyper aggressive. It's who he is. I mean, hell, talk to him for 15 seconds and he's like the Micro Machines man when he talks to you. Like, you're going to miss like 14 out of the 28 words that he spits out. He's awesome. He's great. He's one of my most enjoyable human beings to talk football with, but he's a lot, and he coaches his defense that way. It's some sort of movement, slant, stunt, shift, blitz on every play. It just is. And so I think what happened was Kevin Steele, and I think the influence of Tavares Robinson's helped out a lot as well, because I think Nick Saban's allowed him to have a louder voice than some other folks have had when discussing the defense. And what is he at his core? He's a defensive back, so he probably wants to protect that group. We don't have to blitz every play. It makes it a little bit easier on your safeties and corners. So let's rely on our guys up front to be able to be problematic. What Alabama basically has done forever under Nick Saban. Now, they don't have the same guys inside. There is no Jonathan Allen on this team. There's no Quinnen Williams on this team, but they probably have the best bookend of edge rushers that he's ever had since he's been at Alabama. So they realized, I think pretty early on, we should be able to get home with 4, even though we might not dominate inside. If we can push you into situations where you have to throw the ball, be it 1, we're scoring points, or 2, we're making you work your way down the field, and at some point in time, that offensive coordinator is going to get greedy, that's advantage us. So I think what happened was the defense calmed down a little bit and said, we've got players, we've got talent, we don't need to go overboard scheming things up, just let them play ball. Look at Deontay Lawson this year. I mean, how many times has Deontay Lawson blitzed? It's no more than what you would see from any average inside linebacker across college football. But if you compared it to what the Ole Miss linebackers have done, it would probably be 20, 30, 40% less than what Alabama's had done the last few years. So I think the main thing, Josh, is they just calmed down, and they're really good in the secondary. Terrion Arnold coming into his own has been massive. That has helped that group out tremendously. Having a Malachi Moore that can play every position they have on the back end, be it star, nickel, corner, safety, free, boundary, he can do all of it. And T-Rob's told me that. Like, he knows everything so well, we can put him anywhere. And I think also, look at the SEC championship game. This is something not a lot of people would talk about. Those transfers that they got, that some people laughed at, some people said, Amos, Louisiana, we didn't even offer him here. Some people looked at Jalen Key at UAB and said, a box safety? You got the Caleb Downs kid coming in. Why do you need him? Well, guess who both made plays late in that SEC championship game after Kool-Aid McKinstry went down? It was Trey Amos and it was Jalen Key. So that depth became really valuable for that team as well. And having it on the back end is just something you have to have in today's college football.